During my lunch break, I came home early and found my husband in our guest bedroom with our neighbor. So I locked the door from outside and immediately called her husband to come witness what I had discovered. There are certain moments in life that split your existence into before and after. Moments so powerful they rewrite your entire understanding of reality in a single heartbeat. Mine happened on an ordinary Wednesday afternoon when I decided to drive home to grab some files I desperately needed for an afternoon presentation. Before I dive deeper into what happened that day, I would really appreciate knowing where you're watching this from. Please drop your city or country in the comments section below because it truly amazes me to see how these real-life stories connect people from all corners of the world. My name is Margaret Sullivan, and I'm a 36-year-old woman who genuinely believed her life was perfectly on track. I had been married for 9 years to a man I trusted completely, and we owned a charming colonial house in a peaceful neighborhood on the outskirts of Seattle. My neighbors felt like extended family to me, especially Victoria Hayes, who lived just 2 houses down with her husband Gregory and their twin girls. I worked as a senior accountant at a mid-sized firm downtown, and my daily routine was predictable, structured, and provided me with a sense of security I cherished deeply. That particular morning had been chaotic, as usual, with me rushing around trying to get everything ready before heading out the door. My husband Thomas stayed behind, working from his makeshift office in our converted den, which had become his routine over the past several months since his company shifted to remote work. Welcome to Sarah's Life Chronicles, where I bring you authentic, real-life stories every single day. If you could take a moment to subscribe and hit that like button, it would mean absolutely everything to me and help this channel grow. Now let's jump back into the story that I promise will keep you completely captivated until the final word. "See you tonight, babe," Thomas called out from his workspace as I grabbed my briefcase and rushed toward the front door. I never could have imagined in my wildest nightmares that those casual words would be the last normal exchange we would ever have as husband and wife. What I was about to walk into when I returned home just a few hours later would not only demolish my marriage, but would fundamentally transform who I was as a person. My daily existence operated like clockwork, with every moment carefully planned and executed with precision. Each morning at 6:15, I would start the coffee maker while Thomas took his morning shower. Then we'd sit together at the breakfast table, watching the local news before I drove to my office and he settled into his home workspace. We lived in a beautiful 3-bedroom house in a well-maintained community with tree-lined streets and friendly neighbors who all seemed to know each other's business. I had personally selected every piece of furniture in our home, chosen every shade of paint on the walls, and arranged every decorative accent with meticulous attention to detail, because this house represented everything I had worked so hard to build. It was my safe haven, my refuge from the chaos of the outside world, the one place where I felt completely protected and in control. Our neighbors had become like our second family over the years, particularly Victoria Hayes, who had moved into the neighborhood about 4 years earlier with her husband Gregory and their adorable twin girls. Victoria and I had developed a genuine friendship that I truly valued, meeting for coffee every Sunday morning, exchanging recipes and cooking tips throughout the week, and watching each other's homes whenever one of us traveled out of town. I trusted her without question or hesitation. I trusted Thomas without a shadow of doubt. I trusted my entire life and the foundation it was built upon. That complete and absolute trust would soon reveal itself to be my most devastating mistake, and paradoxically, the greatest catalyst for my personal transformation. Something felt slightly off that particular morning, though I couldn't articulate exactly what was triggering my unease. Thomas seemed more distracted than usual during breakfast, constantly glancing at his phone screen, and when I asked if something was bothering him, he gave me vague non-answers that didn't quite satisfy my concerns. I drove to my office with an uncomfortable knot forming in my stomach that I couldn't explain or shake off. Throughout the entire morning while I was reviewing financial statements and processing expense reports, I couldn't escape this persistent feeling that something wasn't right. I tried calling Thomas around 11 to suggest we meet for lunch together, but his phone went straight to voicemail, which was unusual since he typically always answered my calls. While organizing some paperwork on my desk, I suddenly realized I had left critical documents at home, financial reports that I absolutely had to have for a 2 o'clock client presentation that couldn't be rescheduled. I had no alternative but to drive back home to retrieve them immediately. I informed my supervisor that I needed to step out briefly to handle an urgent personal matter and would return within the hour. The commute from my downtown office to our house typically took about 20 minutes, depending on midday traffic patterns. I assumed I would simply run inside quickly, grab the documents I needed, maybe say a quick hello to Thomas, and then head straight back to finish my workday. Life has this cruel habit of mocking our simplest assumptions and derailing our most mundane plans in the most catastrophic ways imaginable. When I turned onto our street and approached our house, the first detail that caught my attention was Victoria's silver SUV parked directly in our driveway rather than in front of her own house 2 doors down where she normally parked. That's peculiar, I thought to myself, wondering why she would be visiting in the middle of a weekday when she knew Thomas was supposed to be working. I unlocked the front door using my key and stepped into the foyer, immediately struck by how eerily quiet everything was inside. The house felt too silent for 2 people to be present anywhere on the premises. Thomas always played music or podcasts while he worked from home, and if Victoria was visiting, I would certainly expect to hear the sound of conversation or laughter drifting from somewhere in the house. Their shoes weren't lined up in the entryway, where Victoria always left them when she came over, following the house rule I had established years ago. The breakfast dishes Thomas and I had used that morning were still sitting unwashed in the kitchen sink, exactly where we had left them. Then I heard something that made every muscle in my body tense with an instinctive sense of alarm. It was the unmistakable sound of running water coming from somewhere upstairs, specifically from the guest bedroom that we had converted into a spare bathroom last summer. My initial reaction was to assume Thomas must be taking a shower up there for some reason, though that didn't make any logical sense since we had a perfectly functional master bathroom. But that didn't explain where Victoria was or why her vehicle was parked in our driveway. The questions multiplied rapidly in my mind as I slowly climbed the staircase, completely unaware that each step was carrying me closer to the moment that would permanently divide my life into 2 distinct chapters: the person I was before and the person I would become after. I walked up those stairs with my heart pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat, desperately trying to construct some reasonable explanation for what was happening. Perhaps Victoria had come over to borrow something, and Thomas had offered her the use of our guest bathroom because hers was broken or being renovated. Maybe there was some kind of emergency situation, and she needed to shower at our place for reasons I couldn't yet comprehend. My mind frantically grasped at any scenario that would allow my comfortable reality to remain intact. I moved slowly down the upstairs hallway toward our guest bedroom, my hand trembling slightly as I reached for the doorknob. The sound of running water grew louder with each step I took, but now I could detect something else beneath the sound of the shower, something that made my blood run cold. Voices. Low, intimate voices speaking in hushed tones. My hand froze on the doorknob as every instinct in my body screamed at me to stop, to turn around immediately, to go back downstairs and return to my office, and pretend I had never come home at all. "Don't open that door," a voice in my head warned me urgently, because somewhere in my subconscious, I already knew that whatever existed on the other side of that door would destroy everything I had spent 9 years building. But another part of me, the part that refused to live in willful ignorance no matter how painful the truth might be, forced my hand to turn that knob and push the door open. I opened the door slowly, almost in slow motion, and what I saw on the other side wasn't just a betrayal of vows and trust. It was the complete annihilation of the woman I had been just seconds before. There exists no preparation in the world for the moment when your reality completely shatters into a million irreparable pieces. There is no guidebook that teaches you how to respond when you discover the two people you trusted most in your life violating that trust in the most intimate way conceivable. There they were, Thomas and Victoria, together in the guest bedroom shower that I had personally designed and renovated. Their bodies were pressed close together, lost in their own private world, completely oblivious to anything existing outside their bubble of deception. The water cascaded over them as they kissed, with an intensity and passion that I hadn't witnessed from Thomas in what felt like years. His hands moved across her body with a familiarity that could only mean one thing. This was definitely not their first time together in this way. For several seconds, I stood frozen in the doorway, unable to process what my eyes were seeing. My brain completely refused to accept this reality, treating it like some kind of nightmare or hallucination that couldn't possibly be real. But then, Victoria opened her eyes and saw me standing there watching them, and her expression transformed instantly from pleasure to absolute horror. Thomas followed her horrified gaze, and when his eyes met mine, he went completely still. "Margaret," he stammered, my name, as if saying it out loud could somehow reverse what had just been exposed. In that precise moment, something fundamental broke inside me, but it wasn't what anyone would have expected. It wasn't my heart that shattered into pieces. It was the chains of passivity and blind trust that had been holding me captive for so long. I didn't scream or cry or collapsed onto the floor like they probably anticipated I would. Instead, a strange and almost supernatural sense of calm washed over me. It felt as though I had somehow stepped outside my own body and was observing this entire scene from a detached distance, watching it unfold like a movie rather than my actual life. "Stay exactly where you are," I heard myself say in a voice I barely recognized as my own. It was ice cold, controlled, and carried an authority I didn't know I possessed. Thomas started to move toward the shower door. "Margaret, please, just wait. I can explain all of this." "I said, don't move," I repeated, and something in my tone made him freeze instantly in place. I pulled the guest bedroom door closed with a firm, decisive motion, and without hesitating even for a second, I turned the key in the lock from the outside. The metallic click of that lock engaging echoed through the hallway like a gunshot. "Margaret, what are you doing?" Victoria's voice came through the door, sounding panicked and desperate. "Stay in there and think about what you've both done," I responded, surprised by how steady and cold my own voice sounded. "In the meantime, I'm going to make a few very important phone calls." I walked calmly to my bedroom, picked up my cell phone from where I had left it on the nightstand, and scrolled through my contacts until I found the number I needed, a number I had dialed countless times over the past 4 years for completely innocent reasons, like dinner invitations, neighborhood barbecues, and casual friendly conversations, but never for anything remotely like this. Gregory answered after just 2 rings. "Hello, Gregory. How are you doing today?" he said in his usual friendly tone. "Hi, Gregory," I answered, maintaining that same eerie calm. "I need you to come to my house right now. There's something here that you absolutely need to see with your own eyes." While I waited for Gregory to arrive, I sat down on the edge of my bed, the same bed I had shared with Thomas for 9 years, and I allowed myself to really absorb the full weight of what had just happened. The warning signs were there all along, scattered throughout the past several months like breadcrumbs I had been too trusting to notice. Thomas working from home more frequently than his job actually required, his gym sessions getting longer and longer, the way he had started guarding his phone and turning the screen away when I came near him, the extra showers he claimed he needed to relax after particularly stressful work calls. and Victoria, sweet, friendly Victoria, who always seemed to find reasons to stop by our house, specifically on days when she knew Thomas would be home alone, who suddenly started dressing differently and wearing more makeup even for casual neighborhood encounters, who somehow knew intimate details about Thomas's daily schedule that I had never shared with her. Desperate whispers and pleading voices drifted through the locked door, along with the sound of fists pounding softly against the wood. "Margaret, please, this is absolutely insane," Thomas called out. "Just let us out so we can all sit down and talk about this like rational adults." Adults? The word made me laugh out loud bitterly. Adults don't sleep with their neighbor's spouse in their own home. Adults don't construct elaborate lies to hide their betrayals from the people who trust them most. My phone vibrated with an incoming text message from Gregory, saying he had just left his office downtown. I replied telling him to come directly inside when he arrived, that I would explain everything once he was here. During those tense minutes of waiting, I did something I had never done in 9 years of marriage. I picked up Thomas's phone from where he had carelessly left it on his nightstand that morning. It had no password protection because we had always believed in complete transparency and openness in our relationship. What a tragic irony that turned out to be. What I discovered in that phone confirmed that this betrayal extended far deeper and lasted much longer than I had initially imagined. The text message thread between Thomas and Victoria stretched back more than 7 months into the past. 7 months filled with "Good morning, beautiful," and "I can't stop thinking about you" confessions. 7 months of meticulously coordinated plans, detailing exactly when and where they could meet without getting caught. 7 months of them laughing together about how oblivious and naive I was, how ridiculously easy it was to deceive me right under my nose. "Margaret is so trusting and clueless," Victoria had written in one message. "I honestly think we could do this in the living room and she still wouldn't notice anything." "That's what I love most about you," Thomas had replied. "You're everything she isn't. Exciting, spontaneous, and actually fun to be around." But the message that truly tore me apart inside was one from just 3 days ago. "Do you think we should finally tell them both?" Victoria had asked. "I'm starting to feel guilty about Margaret because she really is such a good person." "Not yet," Thomas had replied. "I need to make absolutely sure she doesn't take half of everything when I file for divorce. Give me just a few more weeks to move assets around." I read that specific message 3 times before the full meaning really penetrated my consciousness. They weren't just having an affair behind our backs. They were actively planning to destroy my financial security and leave me with nothing. The doorbell rang, pulling me out of my spiral of devastating discoveries. Gregory had arrived. I walked down the stairs on legs that felt like they might give out at any moment, clutching Thomas's phone tightly in my hand as evidence of everything I had uncovered. Through the front window, I could see Gregory standing on the porch, looking confused and concerned about my cryptic, urgent phone call. Gregory was a genuinely good man, hardworking and completely devoted to his family, always the first to volunteer for school events and neighborhood projects. He had no idea that his entire world was about to implode, just like mine had. I deserved to know the truth, and so did he. I opened the front door and found him standing there in his work clothes, having obviously rushed directly from his job site to get here. He must have left immediately after my call, without even questioning what the emergency might be. His eyes radiated genuine concern and worry. "Margaret, what's going on? You sounded really serious on the phone. Is everything all right here?" he asked. For just a brief moment, I hesitated, understanding that once I spoke these words, there would be absolutely no going back for either of us. Gregory's life would shatter into pieces, just like mine had. His daughters would have to process their parents' divorce. His entire sense of security and trust would be destroyed in an instant. But he deserved the truth, just as much as I had needed to discover it, no matter how devastating that truth might be. "Gregory," I said, and my voice came out surprisingly steady and clear. Victoria is here, in my house, with Thomas. I found them together in the shower. I caught them in the act. I watched as my words took several seconds to fully register in Gregory's mind. His expression shifted through multiple stages, moving from confusion to disbelief, then to a painful dawning comprehension that I recognized perfectly because I had just experienced that exact same progression of emotions. "What do you mean, together?" he asked, even though he clearly understood exactly what I meant based on my tone. "I found them in my guest bedroom shower," I answered quietly. "I've locked them inside. They're waiting upstairs for us to decide what happens next." Gregory leaned heavily against the doorframe leading into my house, as if all the strength had suddenly drained from his legs and he could no longer support his own weight. His face, which was usually so warm and animated and full of life, had turned completely pale and ashen, every bit of color draining away in an instant. "How long?" he whispered, in a voice so quiet I could barely hear him above the sound of the air conditioning unit humming in the background. I handed him Thomas's smartphone without saying a single word, letting the evidence speak for itself. Based on what I just finished reading through, it's been going on for at least 7 months, possibly even longer than that. As Gregory scrolled through the message thread between Thomas and Victoria, I watched his entire world crumble right before my eyes in real time. It was the same hollow, devastated expression I must have worn on my face just 30 minutes earlier. That same sickening combination of shock and betrayal and the horrible realization that the foundation you thought your life was built on was actually quicksand all along. "Oh my God," he breathed out, bringing a shaking hand up to cover his mouth. "The girls, Margaret, how am I supposed to explain any of this to my daughters?" It was the first time since I had walked into that bathroom that I had witnessed someone else experiencing the same raw, agonizing pain that I was feeling, and strangely enough, it made me feel slightly less alone in this nightmare. We moved away from the front entrance and walked into my living room, both of us needing to put some physical distance between ourselves and our cheating spouses who were still locked upstairs. We sat down together on my cream-colored sectional sofa, surrounded by framed photographs that now felt like they were mocking us. There were pictures of Thomas and me cutting our wedding cake with huge smiles on our faces, photos of our two families together on a camping trip to Mount Rainier, and snapshots from last New Year's Eve party, where all 4 of us were laughing and toasting with champagne like we were one big happy family. Every single image had been a complete lie. "I need to understand this," Gregory said, his voice cracking with emotion. "When did this actually start? How could I have been so completely blind to what was happening?" We hunched over Thomas's phone together, scrolling backwards through the message history to piece together a timeline of their betrayal. The very first romantic message exchanged had occurred on the night of a dinner party right here in this house. I remembered that evening with perfect clarity because we had all stayed up late playing card games and drinking wine and having what I thought was a wonderful time together. Apparently, after Gregory and I had both gone to sleep that night, Thomas had walked Victoria back to her house, and that's where they had crossed the line for the first time, sharing a kiss on her front porch while her daughters were upstairs asleep, and her husband was at home, trusting her completely. The messages painted a detailed map of their entire affair. There were meetups at cheap roadside motels during my work hours, quick encounters in Victoria's SUV in empty parking lots on the edge of town, and even secret meetings right here in my own home on days when I had full-day training sessions at the office. "Look at this," Gregory said, pointing to a specific timestamp with a finger that was visibly shaking. "Last Saturday when I took the girls to the aquarium because Victoria claimed she had a terrible migraine and needed to rest. I felt a wave of nausea roll through my stomach. That exact same Saturday, Thomas had told me he was going to meet some college friends for brunch and wouldn't be back until late afternoon. He had come home acting tired and slightly irritable. I had assumed he was just exhausted from socializing, but now I understood he had been with Victoria the entire time. They had become masters of deception, coordinating their lies perfectly, providing each other with airtight alibis, and weaving together a web of deceit so complex and intricate it would have impressed professional con artists. But what hurt the absolute most wasn't the physical aspect of their betrayal. It was how calculated and cold-blooded the whole thing had been. Thomas had been methodically researching divorce strategies in our state, looking up information about how to hive assets in offshore accounts, and asking his attorney friends for advice on how to protect his retirement fund and investments if we split up. Then we discovered something that shifted the entire atmosphere in the room, from devastated sadness to cold fury. Buried in the recent messages, we found evidence that Thomas and Victoria weren't just planning to end their respective marriages. They were planning to build a whole new life together. I found the perfect townhouse downtown, Victoria had written just 5 days ago. It has 3 bedrooms so the girls can stay over on weekends. It's in the district for that excellent charter school too, just in case we decide to pursue full custody down the line. Perfect, Thomas had responded immediately. As soon as I'm free from Margaret and you've left Gregory behind, we can finally start our real, authentic life together. No more sneaking around, no more lies, no more pretending. Gregory read that message out loud, his voice dripping with a bitterness that seemed to fill every corner of the room. No more lies, he repeated slowly. After 7 solid months of nothing but lies, they want to build their relationship on honesty and truth? The situation got even worse as we continued reading. Victoria had been feeding Thomas private, intimate information about Gregory, things that only a wife should know. She had told Thomas about Gregory's insecurities at his job, his anxiety about providing adequately for their family, and even vulnerable moments from their private bedroom conversations. Thomas had used that information to mock Gregory in the text messages, making cruel jokes and feeling superior about himself. "She's been using you," I said softly to Gregory. "They've been using both of us as entertainment, as punchlines to their private jokes, while we trusted them completely." In that exact moment, something fundamental changed in Gregory's eyes. The grief and hurt hardened into cold determination and resolve. "You know what?" he said, standing up from my sofa. "It's time we go upstairs and have a very serious conversation with them." We sat there for just one more moment, Margaret and Gregory, 2 victims of the same cruel betrayal, bonded together by a trauma we never asked for and never deserved. It was strange how shared suffering could create an instant deep connection between 2 people who, until an hour ago, had just been friendly neighbors who waved at each other while getting the mail. "You know what hurts the absolute most about all of this?" Gregory said, staring at a framed photograph of our families at a 4th of July barbecue. "It's not just that she cheated on me and broke her vows. It's that she turned me into an unwitting accomplice to my own betrayal. Every single time I encouraged her to come over here because you seemed lonely and could use the company. Every time I watched the girls so she could help Thomas with some made-up project. Every time I hosted dinner for all 4 of us, thinking we were building genuine friendships, I was actively helping facilitate my own destruction without even knowing it." I understood exactly what he meant, because I had been an accomplice too. Every time I worked late at the office so Thomas could have peace and quiet at home, every time I defended Victoria when Gregory mentioned she seemed distant, every time I congratulated myself on how fortunate I was to have such wonderful neighbors and such a stable marriage. "It's not our fault," I said, speaking the words as much for myself as for him. "We operated with honesty and integrity. They're the ones who chose to betray that trust." Gregory nodded his head slowly. "But now we get to choose how we respond to what they've done." He was absolutely right. This was our moment to decide who we would become in the aftermath of this devastation. We climbed the stairs together, walking side by side, united by a grim determination I had never experienced before. For the first time since this whole nightmare began, I didn't feel like a helpless victim anymore. I felt like a woman who had just discovered she had a backbone made of steel. As we reached the top of the staircase and approached the guest bedroom, the sounds coming from behind the locked door had changed dramatically. It was no longer desperate, hushed whispering. It had escalated into a full-blown argument between Thomas and Victoria. "This is entirely your fault," Victoria hissed through the wooden door. "You promised me she never came home during lunch on Wednesdays, that her schedule was completely predictable." "My fault?" Thomas shot back, his voice rising in anger. "You're the one who insisted we couldn't wait until tonight like we usually do. You said you needed to see me right away." "I'm sick of waiting around," Victoria practically screamed. "I'm sick of cheap motels and stolen moments. You told me you would have already filed the divorce papers by now." Gregory and I exchanged a look. Even now, trapped and completely exposed, they were attacking each other instead of taking any responsibility for their actions. "Thomas," called out from inside, "Margaret, I know you're out there somewhere. Please, we can handle this in a civilized, mature way. Just let us out and we can all sit down and talk this through like reasonable adults." Gregory stepped up closer to the door, his shadow falling across the wood. "Thomas," he said, and his voice was deeper and more frightening than I had ever heard him before. "This is Gregory. I think you and my wife have quite a lot to explain to do." The silence that followed was thick and suffocating, heavy with dread. "Gregory," Victoria's voice came through the door, sounding small and childlike. "Gregory, honey, please, just let me explain what happened." "I'm listening," he replied with a calmness that mirrored the eerie composure I had felt earlier. "Victoria, you're naked in our neighbor's shower with her husband. Exactly which part of this isn't what it looks like?" But then Thomas spoke up, and what came out of his mouth sucked every molecule of oxygen right out of the hallway. "Gregory, Margaret, look, you both have to try to understand something. This situation is way more complicated than you're making it out to be. Victoria and I, we fell in love with each other. It wasn't something we planned or wanted to happen. These feelings just developed naturally over time." "In love?" I repeated the words inside my head. A fire ignited deep in my chest, burning hot and fierce. They fell in love while systematically lying to our faces for 7 solid months. "We knew it was messy and painful," Thomas continued, sounding almost self-righteous and justified, "but we couldn't control or deny our feelings for each other. We wanted to tell you both the truth. We were just waiting and looking for the right moment to have that conversation." Gregory slammed his fist against the door so hard the entire frame shook, the sound reverberating like a gunshot through the quiet house. "The right moment?" he roared with more anger than I had ever heard from him. "You mean like after you signed the lease on that downtown townhouse you already picked out? After you made sure Margaret wouldn't get a fair share in the divorce? After you decided whether or not my daughters would be living with you permanently?" The silence on the other side of the door confirmed we had struck a nerve and exposed their entire plan. "How do you know about that?" Victoria whispered, and in her trembling voice I could hear the dawning realization that her carefully constructed fantasy world was collapsing. "Text messages," I replied simply and matter-of-factly. "Very detailed, very revealing, very incriminating messages that show exactly what you've both been planning." What followed was a desperate chorus of backtracking and damage control. Thomas shouted that the messages were being taken completely out of context and misunderstood. Victoria insisted she never seriously meant anything about custody arrangements for the girls. Both of them frantically tried to minimize and shrink the enormity of what we had discovered, attempting to make their betrayals small enough that we might somehow consider forgiving them. But Gregory and I were completely done listening to their excuses and manipulation. We stood there reading message after message that documented not just their physical affair, but their elaborate financial conspiracy against us and their cold-blooded emotional betrayal. "Margaret," Gregory said quietly, leaning close to me, "does your phone have a voice recording app on it? I nodded yes, immediately understanding exactly what he was thinking. Good, because I think we should record some of these confessions for our divorce attorneys to hear. I pulled up the recording application on my smartphone, pressed the red record button, and knocked gently on the locked door. Thomas, Victoria, could you please repeat that part about being in love with each other and maybe clarify the specific timeline about waiting for the perfect moment to leave us both financially ruined? My divorce lawyer is going to find this absolutely fascinating. The sheer panic in their voices as the legal reality of their situation began to sink in was honestly the sweetest sound I had heard all year long. Gregory and I turned away from the door and walked back downstairs together, leaving them locked inside with their recorded confessions and their mounting terror about what came next. We sat back down on my living room sofa, two people who had woken up this morning living completely different lives, now working together to forge a path through the wreckage of our destroyed marriages. "What do we do now?" he asked me with genuine uncertainty in his voice. For the first time since I had turned that bathroom doorknob and seen the truth, I smiled. It wasn't a happy smile exactly, but it was a smile of recognition and newfound power. I had just realized I wasn't the helpless doormat housewife they had both assumed I was. "Now," I said while checking the battery percentage on my phone to make sure it wouldn't die, "we give them exactly what they deserve, every single consequence they've earned." I started putting together a comprehensive action plan, mentally listing everyone who needed to be contacted immediately about what had just been discovered. My divorce attorney, Gregory's lawyer, our respective employers to explain why neither of us would be returning to work for the rest of the day, and perhaps most importantly, Victoria's sister Rachel, who had been watching the twin girls yesterday afternoon while Victoria claimed she had food poisoning. "You're planning to call her sister?" Gregory asked with raised eyebrows, showing his surprise. "Her sister watched our daughters yesterday while Victoria pretended to be violently ill," I reminded him gently. "Rachel deserves to know the real reason she was babysitting, don't you think?" Gregory nodded slowly, processing this. "You're absolutely right about that. And I'm going to contact Thomas's direct supervisor at his company. I'm quite certain his boss will be very interested to learn why his remote employee has had so many sudden family emergencies and urgent personal appointments lately that required him to be unavailable during business hours." It was time for actions to finally meet their consequences head on. Over the course of the next 90 minutes, Gregory and I systematically orchestrated what could only be described as a campaign of complete and total transparency. First, we contacted our respective attorneys. My lawyer practically bubbled with enthusiasm when I laid out all the evidence we had gathered. "Margaret, this is absolutely incredible," she told me over the phone. "Documented proof of adultery, clear conspiracy to conceal marital assets, and actual recorded confessions of their intentions. Thomas won't have any leverage whatsoever to dictate even a single term in your divorce settlement." Gregory's attorney expressed similar optimism regarding his custody prospects for the twin girls. "With this kind of documented evidence, you have an extremely strong case," the lawyer assured him. "Courts take parental fitness very seriously, and her affair combined with the deceptive behavior pattern will work heavily in your favor." Then came the more emotionally difficult phone calls we needed to make. Victoria's sister Rachel was completely devastated when I carefully explained the real reason her sister's marriage was ending and why she had really needed childcare yesterday. "I always sensed something was off lately," Rachel confessed, her voice shaking with emotion. "Victoria has been so secretive and distant these past few months, always making excuses and avoiding family gatherings. I thought maybe she was dealing with depression or something, but I never imagined it was this." Thomas's supervisor reacted with professional outrage when he learned his employee had been fabricating emergencies and medical issues to conduct an extramarital affair during work hours. "That constitutes a serious violation of our company's code of conduct and is essentially time theft," he informed me in a stern voice. "There will be immediate human resources involvement, and this will likely result in termination for cause given the documented pattern of dishonesty." While we were systematically making these calls, the sounds coming from upstairs had evolved and intensified significantly. Thomas and Victoria had cycled through what seemed like every possible emotional response, starting with more excuses, then shifting to desperate begging and pleading, then attempting to make threats, and finally circling back to pathetic emotional appeals. "Margaret, please," Thomas shouted through the door, his voice cracking. 9 years of marriage has to count for something meaningful. We can go to couples counseling together. We can work through this and fix what's broken between us. "Gregory," Victoria sobbed loudly enough that we could hear her downstairs. "Think about our daughters and what this will do to them. Don't tear our family apart over one terrible mistake I made." "One mistake?" I repeated quietly to Gregory. 7 months of calculated deception and conspiracy, and she has the audacity to call it one mistake? "You know what?" I said to Gregory as I ended my call with Thomas's employer. "I think it's finally time to let them out of that room." Gregory looked at me with surprise evident on his face. "Are you absolutely sure about that?" "Completely certain," I said, feeling a surge of strength and power I didn't know existed inside me. "But first, we need to properly set the stage for what comes next." It was time for them to face not just their betrayed spouses, but the complete and total weight of all the consequences their actions had created. I climbed those stairs for the 3rd time that afternoon, but I was an entirely different woman than I had been on any previous trip. I wasn't the naive, trusting Margaret who had come home innocently to grab forgotten documents. I wasn't even the shocked, angry wife who had discovered them together. I was the author of my own life story now, taking back control of the narrative they had tried to write for me. Gregory walked closely behind me, and we positioned ourselves directly in front of the guest bedroom door. The noise inside had stopped completely. No more begging or arguing, just a heavy, suffocating silence. The sound of 2 people who were finally beginning to understand that their entire world had permanently ended. Before I inserted the key into the lock, I turned to look at Gregory and said something I needed him to hear. "I want you to know something important, Gregory. This horrible experience has changed me forever, and I can say with certainty it's not in the way they expected or wanted." Gregory met my eyes from across the narrow hallway, his expression reflecting the same steel determination I felt solidifying in my own core. He said quietly that this nightmare had revealed to him that he possessed more inner strength than he ever believed possible, and I knew exactly what he meant because I felt it too. I reached into my pocket and wrapped my fingers around the cool metal of the door key. It was the exact same key I turned in a moment of pure instinct just over an hour ago, when my world was actively imploding around me. An automatic act of self-preservation when everything I thought I knew was collapsing. But now, as I gripped it tightly with the sharp edges pressing into my palm, it represented something completely different. It was no longer a tool for containment and control. It represented my conscious, deliberate choice not just to open a physical door, but to open a new chapter of my existence that was both terrifying and liberating. I drew in a deep breath that seemed to fill my entire chest with sudden clarity and purpose. "Thomas, Victoria," I announced clearly, my voice resonating through the wooden barrier, "you're going to come out now, but you both need to fully understand that everything has fundamentally changed." I turned the key in the lock, the metallic click echoing like a starting pistol in the silent hallway, and I took a step back to give them space. The door swung open slowly, almost reluctantly, and 2 figures emerged who bore no resemblance to the confident, scheming lovers I had trapped in there earlier. The bathroom steam drifted out with them, carrying the scent of my expensive jasmine body wash that she felt completely entitled to use without asking. They were no longer the self-assured, scheming lovers who had been plotting to systematically dismantle our marriages over secret lunches and stolen afternoons in cheap motels. They were just 2 shivering, vulnerable people who had suddenly realized they had gambled absolutely everything that mattered in their lives and lost spectacularly. Thomas emerged first, hastily wrapped in one of our oversized navy bath towels. His eyes were red-shot and swollen, wearing the haunted expression of someone who had just finished calculating the true devastating cost of his arrogance and entitlement. Victoria followed right behind him, clutching a matching towel tightly around her torso, visibly trembling. She was shaking, not just from the chill of the air conditioning hitting her damp skin, but from the crushing weight of realizing that her life as she had known it was effectively finished. Thomas extended his hand toward me instinctively, a reflexive gesture born from 9 years of physical intimacy and shared space, but I jerked backward as if his touch would burn my skin. "Don't you dare touch me," I said, and my voice was frighteningly calm, dangerously controlled, a tone I had never used in my entire life. "You have absolutely zero right to ever put your hands on me again for any reason." Gregory stood beside me like an immovable pillar of judgment and condemnation. Victoria attempted to speak, her voice cracking with desperation. "Gregory, sweetheart, please just give me a chance to explain everything properly." Gregory raised one hand sharply, cutting her off before she could spin another elaborate web of lies. "There is absolutely nothing left to explain, Victoria," he said, his voice completely flat and stripped of any warmth or affection. "You've already explained everything with perfect clarity in your text messages. You explained it when you coordinated plans to move into a townhouse together. You explained it when you laughed about how stupid and blind Margaret and I were. We had seen them exposed in every possible way. We had seen them physically naked in my guest bathroom, but far more importantly, we had witnessed them emotionally naked in their desperate pleading and morally naked in their pathetic attempts at justification. They held absolutely no power over us anymore because they held no secrets. The hidden affair that had fueled their relationship was now the very ammunition being used for their complete destruction. "Sit down," I commanded, pointing firmly to the edge of the guest bed where I had discovered them earlier. "Sit down right now because you're going to listen very carefully to exactly what happens next." They lowered themselves onto the edge of the mattress, like children being disciplined by the school principal, and for the first time in 9 years of marriage, Thomas didn't argue with me or try to debate or attempt to convince me I was being unreasonable. He simply sat there listening, but it was far too late for his cooperation to make any difference whatsoever. "First," I began, pacing slowly back and forth in front of them while they watched me nervously, "you will both get dressed immediately and you will leave my house within the next 10 minutes. Thomas, you may return tomorrow to collect your essential belongings, but you will only enter this property with either a police officer present or a neutral third-party witness. I am having every lock in this house changed tonight." "Second," I continued, feeling each word restore another piece of my shattered dignity, "our attorneys have already been fully briefed on this entire situation. The complete text message history, the audio recordings of your confessions through the door, the detailed timeline of your affair, and your calculated scheme to hide marital assets. Everything has been thoroughly documented and backed up to secure cloud storage. Thomas, your fantasy about leaving me with nothing in the divorce has just transformed into your worst legal nightmare." I watched all remaining color drain completely from his face, leaving him looking pale and almost greenish. "Margaret, surely we can reach some kind of reasonable agreement here," he stammered weakly, desperately trying to regain some footing. "Reasonable?" I repeated the word slowly, letting it hang in the air. "Tell me, Thomas, how was it reasonable to spend 7 months plotting how to destroy my financial security? How was it reasonable to mock me in private messages while eating the meals I cooked for you? How was it reasonable to transform our home and our bed and our entire shared life into a stage for your elaborate betrayal?" Gregory stepped forward with purpose, taking control of the conversation with clinical precision. "Victoria, your sister Rachel already knows the real reason you needed emergency childcare yesterday. Your department supervisor knows the truth about why you've been leaving work early so frequently over the past months. And our daughters will eventually understand that their father fought desperately to keep this family intact, while their mother chose to deliberately burn it all down. You absolutely cannot tell my children about this," Victoria protested desperately, a sound of pure panic rising in her throat. I don't have to tell them a single thing, Gregory replied with a strength and authority I had never witnessed in him before. Actions create consequences, Victoria, and yours are going to echo through our family for years to come. It was at that precise moment that I did something neither of them could have anticipated or prepared for. I walked directly up to Thomas until I was standing just inches from his face and looked him straight in the eyes without blinking. "Do you know what actually hurts the most about this entire situation?" I asked him softly, my voice barely above a whisper. "It's not that you violated your marriage vows and cheated on me. It's not that you conspired to steal from me financially. It's not even that you used my own home as your personal playground for deception." I paused deliberately, allowing the silence to stretch until it became almost unbearable and suffocating. Then my voice gained strength with each syllable I spoke. "What hurts most is that you completely and utterly underestimated who I actually am as a person." Thomas stared at me with obvious confusion, blinking rapidly as if that would help him understand. "For 9 solid years, you treated me like I was weak and helpless, like I was stupid and oblivious, like I was completely incapable of standing up for myself or demanding respect. Your entire elaborate plan was built on the assumption that I was the pathetic, clueless wife you convinced yourself you had married. But I was never that woman, Thomas. I just needed the right catalyst to wake me up and show me my own strength." I shifted my attention to Victoria, who was staring down to the floor, unable to meet my gaze. "And you, Victoria, you called yourself my friend while actively plotting to systematically destroy everything I had built. You laughed at my trusting nature while I opened my home and my heart to you without reservation. You assumed I was too naive and dumb to ever notice the obvious signs right in front of my face. But here I am, standing tall and strong, and you two are the ones who have lost absolutely everything that mattered." The transformation was now complete and irreversible. I was no longer the woman I had been when I woke up that morning, the one who worried obsessively about meal planning and keeping the house spotless. I was someone entirely new, someone who had discovered her voice and her spine, and her ability to stare betrayal directly in the face and emerge victorious and empowered. "Now," I said with a finality that seemed to slice through the thick air like a blade, "I want both of you to get dressed, leave my house immediately, and never come back here again. Your relationship started with lies and deception, and it's ending with consequences and justice." My story is just beginning. Gregory turned to face Victoria directly. "You have exactly 1 hour to pack a suitcase with essential items and vacate our house as well. Our lawyers will handle everything else from this point forward." It was the single most powerful moment of both our lives. When they finally shuffled out my front door, looking small and defeated and broken, Gregory and I stood together in my living room, surrounded by the scattered remnants of what our family lives had been just hours before. But strangely and unexpectedly, I didn't feel devastation or despair. I felt an incredible, soaring sense of liberation and freedom. "How are you feeling right now?" Gregory asked me, turning to study my face. I considered the question carefully for a long moment, listening to the peaceful silence that now filled the house. "I feel like I've been completely reborn," I answered with total honesty, as if I had been sleepwalking through my entire life for years and had finally just woken up for the first time. Gregory smiled, a genuine, exhausted smile that reached his eyes. "Me too," he said. "It's strange, isn't it? We should be collapsed on the floor, crying and falling apart, but instead, I feel stronger and more alive than I have felt in years." He was absolutely right about that. The betrayal, as agonizing and devastating as it had been, had served as the catalyst we both desperately needed to discover who we really were beneath the surface. We weren't the idealized, foolish versions our spouses had created in their heads to justify their actions, but capable, resilient, powerful people who had simply needed the right moment to recognize our own strength. That evening, after Gregory returned to his own house to begin facing his complicated situation with his daughters, I sat completely alone in my home for the first time as a woman who knew her marriage was over. But surprisingly, I didn't feel the crushing loneliness I had expected to feel. Instead, I felt an overwhelming sense of freedom and possibility. I walked methodically through every single room of my house, consciously reclaiming each space as mine alone, taking back my sanctuary and my life from the people who had violated it. This house would no longer be remembered as the crime scene of my betrayal. It would become the birthplace of a woman who discovered her true strength and made the conscious decision to rewrite her entire story. The months that followed were a complete period of rebuilding and reconstruction from the ground up. The divorce proceedings turned out to be significantly easier and faster than I had initially feared they would be, thanks to the overwhelming mountain of evidence Thomas had so carelessly provided through his unguarded text messages. He had absolutely zero negotiating leverage. He couldn't take a single penny more than he was legally entitled to, and his elaborate scheme to hide marital assets completely backfired, which resulted in an extremely favorable settlement that gave me far more than I had expected. But the most important victory wasn't measured in legal terms or financial compensation. It was deeply personal and transformative. Every single day that passed without Thomas in my life was another day I rediscovered who Margaret Sullivan actually was, without the constant, steady stream of subtle criticism from a man who had spent years systematically diminishing my worth and confidence. I went back to pursuing dreams I had abandoned years ago. I enrolled in photography classes that I had always desperately wanted to take, but Thomas had dismissed as an impractical hobby and waste of money. I traveled solo for the first time in my adult life, taking a 3-week trip through the Southwest just to photograph desert landscapes and watch stunning sunsets. I cultivated new friendships with people who knew me as the confident, independent woman I had evolved into, not the submissive, accommodating wife I used to be before everything changed. Gregory and I maintained a special, unique friendship that was bonded by our shared experience of discovering our personal power in what had been our darkest moment. He absolutely flourished after his divorce finalized, finding the time and energy to be the present, engaged father his twin daughters desperately needed, without the constant complications and toxicity of a poisonous marriage. His girls adjusted better than anyone expected, and he eventually found happiness again with someone who truly valued and respected him. 18 months after that Wednesday afternoon, the day I started referring to privately as my awakening, I accidentally ran into Thomas at a farmer's market downtown. He looked noticeably older than I remembered, tired and worn down by life. His relationship with Victoria had imploded spectacularly under the crushing weight of guilt, shame, and the financial devastation brought on by their own selfish actions. "Margaret," he said awkwardly, stopping near the organic produce stand, "I've been wanting to tell you that I'm genuinely sorry for everything I put you through." I looked at him carefully and realized with a sudden jolt of clarity that I felt absolutely nothing toward him anymore. No residual anger, no lingering love, no hatred, not even mild irritation, just complete and total indifference. "I appreciate that," I answered, realizing as I spoke that it was actually true. "But I don't need or want your apology anymore, Thomas. Your betrayal gave me the greatest gift you possibly could have given me. It forced me to see who I really am and what I'm truly capable of." Today, as I'm sharing this story with all of you, more than 2 years have passed from that Wednesday that permanently changed the trajectory of my entire life. My house has been completely transformed and renovated, not just physically with fresh paint colors and new furniture that reflects my personal taste, but energetically and spiritually. It's now authentically my sanctuary, filled with photographs I've taken myself, books that genuinely inspire and challenge me, and memories of adventures I've experienced on my own terms. The betrayal I experienced didn't end up defining who I am. My response to that betrayal is what defined me. I learned through this painful experience that sometimes the most devastating and traumatic moments of our lives turn out to be the most liberating and transformative. Sometimes our comfortable world has to completely fall apart so we can finally realize that we possess the power to construct a new and infinitely better one from the pieces. Not all endings are happy in the conventional fairy tale sense. My marriage ended in betrayal. My trust was severely abused and exploited, and my life was completely turned upside down in a single afternoon. But through that destruction, I discovered something far more valuable than the illusion of security I had before. I discovered my authentic self. To every woman who might be listening to this story right now, who feels lost and invisible in her own life, who feels unappreciated and taken for granted, who genuinely believes she doesn't have the inner strength to change her circumstances, I want to tell you something critically important. Your strength is already there inside you right now, just waiting patiently for the right moment to reveal itself. You are so much more powerful than you currently believe. My story isn't really about revenge or payback. It's about rebirth and transformation. It's about the discovery that sometimes when we think we've lost absolutely everything, we're actually standing on the edge of gaining everything that truly matters. The betrayal ultimately gave me my freedom back, and that freedom gave me access to my authentic life. If this story resonated with you in any way, or if it made you reflect on your own hidden inner strength, then it has served its intended purpose. Because every single woman deserves to know that she is infinitely more powerful than society has taught her to believe. Thank you so much for being here with me today and allowing me to share my personal journey with you. If you found value in my story and it touched your heart, please show your support by hitting that like button and subscribing to this channel so you never miss future stories. Let's see just how strong and supportive our community can become together. I would absolutely love for you to write in the comments section what city or country you're tuning in from and what time it is where you are right now. I'm always incredibly curious and fascinated to discover where all you wonderful people are listening from around the world. If you'd like to support this channel even further, you can check out the link provided in the description below. I share powerful real-life stories every single day just for you and this amazing community. Right now, 2 of my most popular and viewed stories are appearing on your screen, so you can continue listening and stay engaged with more content immediately. Take care of yourselves and remember your strength.